We are live with the one and only, and this is probably the only time I'll say her full title, the Right Honourable Helen Clark.
Yeah. How's it going, Helen?
Well, a wet day where I am, but otherwise, you know, we're lucky to live in New Zealand, right?
Yeah, exactly. And both of you guys are actually in Auckland at the moment, aren't you? So
No, I'm not. No,
Oh, no.
I came to look after my elderly father, who's 98, and wouldn't be fair if the lockdown went on and on for him not to have any family support. So yeah, I'm down the line, as it were.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice. Oh, that must be a nice little break for you at least, although your work schedule will still be flat out.
Yeah, well, with what I do, I can be anywhere.
Yep.
So
We've just lost her in a...
Oh, it's just because she's in the rural part of the
She's got that rural Wi-Fi that we've got to update.
That's right. Hang on,
yeah.
there she is. She's
Oh,
back.
I can do it from... I'm back. Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
It can be a bit iffy in the rain, but if it is, I'll just dial back in. So just
That's
stay
fine.
there.
Yeah. So what is your work schedule like right now? You talked about how you can work anywhere. How many hours per day?
Well, most of the things I do are not in New Zealand at all. They're linked to initiatives that are based overseas. For example, the panel that I'm co-chairing with the former president of Liberia on the international response to COVID-19, that we do virtually, but we do at night. Former president of Liberia is in Liberia on the 12-hour behind New Zealand.
Oh my God.
Our little secretariat is being established in Geneva. So that's kind of typical. A lot of things I do, they have their secretariat in Geneva or Brussels or Oslo or New York, but very different time zones. So that means you work quite a lot of the night. So often, you know, it'll be a 9 o'clock start at night, and then some people try to schedule things to get you on starting at 2 in the morning. I don't like starting at 2 in the morning, but I often finish things at 2 in the morning. But, you know, with the technology now, including Zoom, which we're recording this on, I've found it's actually quite easy to record a statement and say, look, you know, you wanted me to make a statement at something. There's no interactivity on the panel. So I'm just going to send you the video and you play the video. So I do quite a lot of that. But that, of course, means you have to, you know, get a script and you have to edit it, and there's a lot of work involved, and I am involved in a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so can you walk us through what your life was, I guess, before COVID, when you were, in the UN and traveling? Can you just give us like maybe a typical month, really?
Well, you know, I left UNDP in New York more than 3 years ago. It was 3 years and 4 months, April 2017. And when you leave, you have a clear diary, except for the big bucket list things you want to do. And I rode the Trans-Siberian Railway and did all sorts of interesting things. But pretty quickly, the diary filled up because I, worked at so many high-level issues for a long time, and so I did end up, taking on all these chairs, jobs, and members of commissions and boards and so on, and being invited to a tremendous number of conferences and events. So what I would do is get a program together which would see me go away from New Zealand and not head to Europe for a week. That's just too tough, right? But I would get a program that would see me almost go round the world, as it were, doing this, and then back home, and then home to recharge, repack the suitcase, get a few things done, the dental appointments, whatever, and then you'd go again. So I was in and out of New Zealand a lot in the almost 3 years before COVID struck. And fortunately, I wasn't a Kiwi stranded abroad. I had planned to come home for my major birthday at the end of February, and that's really the last major round of big conferences, events, and board meetings in person that I'll do. But my life had a lot of travel in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we caught up. It would have been about 2 weeks ago now that you were in Dunedin, wasn't it?
Well, yes, so we were there on the Tuesday
Yeah.
when that night at a public meeting with Ingrid Leary and Claire Curran and Dunedin South. When we finished the meeting, they said the news had come over their smartphones saying that Auckland was going to level 3 the next day, and everywhere else to level 2, and that affected the visit that I'd planned to Oamaru with Leanne, because while technically we could have done it, getting people physically distanced in a public meeting at a hotel, it's just too hard and not really fair to ask people to come out, I think, in those circumstances. So we did record an interview for that, which I hope we'll play at some point too.
Yeah, that will be coming out soon. So we actually all have a few similarities. So we were all involved in Young Labour at some point. Me and Naisi are still fortunate enough to be a part of that. And we were all running in a fairly blue seat on our first time. So do you have any stories, or do you have any advice to give to me and Naisi while we go through our first? Second time, Naisi.
Me at second, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you're actually running in a seat, Liam, which can be won by Labour, right?
Oh, there you go.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it was held by Nordmeyer, the visionary Minister of Social Security in the first Labour government, and held by Jim Sutton, MP for Waitaki in the fourth Labour government, and then held again in my time as PM as well. So it can be won. The seat I ran for couldn't be won. It was, I think, the third safest national seat in New Zealand, and it had a lot of rural heartland, but you could certainly find support in the towns. When I ran in 1975, I won only one polling booth, and that was Arapuni, which is in the South Waikato, and there was a New Zealand Electricity Department village there for the Arapuni hydro dam, and I had good support from the workers and families and pensioners in the Arapuni village. But, I ran in that electorate because you need to get a taste for, whether you really want to run. And Naisi, you're running in botany. That's tough, right? It's a tough seat. But you will get a taste from that as to whether you really like political life.
I ran in East Coast Base, which is even bluer than botany.
Yeah, well, that's tough.
So what because I was listening to your valedictory speech before coming on today, and you were saying how you got to pick up some of the skills, or you got to go through, the learnings of running in a blue seat. And what were some of those skills that you would tell us to kind of look out for, to pick up along the way?
Well, look, I think an important thing to recognize in politics is that a majority of people are never going to vote for your party. Even in the best years, and Labour's had some great polls this year, it's very, very hard to poll 50%. Most of our great victories, and I had 3 of them. The first one was just under 38%, and the next 2 were around 42%. Those were good wins, and in first past the post, they would have given you a majority, all of them. But what that means is that even in a good year for your party, more than half the electorate isn't voting for you. So if you run in a particularly blue seat, of course, as many as 60 or 65% might not be voting for you. So you learn to accommodate difference and respect different opinions, and also to meet many people who are very different from yourself. I mean, for me, it was a slightly different experience because I came from rural New Zealand. I knew rural New Zealand extremely well. I grew up in it. I grew up on a farm. You can see one of the paddocks from my father's farm in the painting behind. Now a reserve, actually, the Kaniwhanafa Reserve in the West Waikato. But yeah, just getting to know people different from yourself, different views from yourself. I think that's very important.
So what kind of workload do you have on your plate at the moment? What sort of things are you involved with day to day?
So day to day, and if you just give me 1 minute, my father needs to talk to someone.
Yeah, Helen's back with her dad, so that's It's so sweet, eh? How
Her father's 98, 98, I think she said.
98, yeah.
She's the oldest of 4 daughters, so she continually looks after her father. And even when she was the administrator at UNDP, which is the third highest ranked position in the United Nations, she was still using all of her holiday weeks to fly back to Waihi Beach, where he lives, and prepare
Exactly.
freeze and things like
Right,
that.
sorry about that. My father had the phone off the hook, and the sister was trying to ring. My father is 98, so
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
amazing.
So what am I involved
In right now?
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah. So what am I doing at the moment? The biggest positions I'm holding at the moment, and bear in mind these are all, public good. I mean, these are not private sector. So basically, it's your expenses and sometimes a small honorarium, usually not the latter. And the WHO review panel is, completely pro bono, public good.
Wow.
And that, I mean, obviously that's taking time. We have to set it up responsibly. We have to get our panel appointed. We have to work out our work program, how we're going to do the task. We have now got good people coming into a team in Geneva to help us drive that. But that's a call 1, 2, 3 times a week. It's background papers. It's interacting with the staff directly. So I have to give priority to that. Now, there's 2 other things of particularly high priority because they're major organisations. One is the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative, not well known in New Zealand, and New Zealand is not a member, but should be. It is an initiative that was set up in the early 2000s to fight corruption in the governance of the extractive industries. And we're talking oil, gas, and minerals. And you only have to think of the movie Blood Diamonds to know that natural resources can be a source of conflict and division. And you only have to think Angola and Nigeria, and you think corruption in the oil industry and so on. Sadly, this is quite a common story, and citizens of countries are cheated of, the birthright they have when there's stealing and conflict over these resources. It was after a particularly egregious case of corruption in the Angolan industry that the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair called together a conference at Lancaster House in London, brought leaders from many countries, including Africa, together and said, we've got to do something about this. And everyone agreed. So this initiative, EITI, Extractive Industry Transparent Initiative, was launched. And it has, over all these years, about 17 years, developed and refined and revised the equivalent of a convention. It's called a standard. And it sets out the standards for transparency and disclosure in the extractive sector. So governments have to disclose contracts. Companies have to disclose beneficial ownership. Processes have to be open and transparent. The public have to be able to see where the money's coming from and where it's going to. It's really been a fantastic initiative for trying to clean up these sectors. We still get new countries joining. Uganda has just joined. Our board has just approved that. And Ecuador has applied, and I'm pretty certain will be approved quite quickly. We have 54 member countries now with Uganda. It's a good thing. There are some developed countries like New Zealand which do implement the standard, have joined. Norway, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. New Zealand still has, obviously, some oil and gas industry, and it has quite a lot of mining. So, for a developed country to join, says, look, we recognize that, these are global issues and we want to be supportive. So that board meets 3 times a year. We're doing it all on Zoom now. But as the board chair, obviously, I provide a lot more direct support to the chief executive and the key staff, and I clear a lot of correspondence and board papers, and I take part in webinars with organizations. So I give a lot of priority to that. Then there's the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. This has its secretariat hosted at the World Health Organization in Geneva. It is a network of around 1,000 organizations. And it goes all the way from the biggies like UNICEF and the World Bank and the Global Fund Facility for Health at the World Bank as well, and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and goes all the way through to the civil society organizations, wonderful organizations like the White Ribbon Alliance, which advocates for dignified, human rights-based services for women. So that again, I have a lot of interaction as the chair with the secretariat, with the various committees, with online meetings. So and then there's a range of other organizations as well. I'm just taking on now the chair of the Global Commission on Drug Policy, because we are former heads of state and government, plus some other eminent personalities who believe that the prohibition approach has been a complete failure and actually has led to many human rights abuses and disasters and very high rates of imprisonment, as we see in our own country. And we campaign against prohibition and for the responsible regulation of drugs, which is why I'm campaigning for a vote yes in the referendum for the cannabis legalization and control bill. I'm also at the moment chairing Women Political Leaders Organization, which is based in Brussels. It does really good meetings, obviously not in person just at the moment, but when I've been to them in Iceland and in Tokyo and they get women parliamentarians and aspiring parliamentarians from the widest range of countries. And I think that's fantastic. And again, sort of accommodating diversity and difference. You will get women parliamentarians from the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. The Kiwis have been good at coming. And from Turkmenistan and Iran and, countries which have very different systems from our own. So, I like that. So, look, there's other organizations too, the Club de Madrid, the former Leaders Club, I'm on the board of that, et cetera, et cetera. So it does keep me extremely busy. And then I still comment, obviously a lot on health issues, global health issues. I comment a lot on drug policy. You'll see on my Twitter feed from time to time, I'll be picking up the issues from the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And I still, obviously keep a close eye on geopolitics and big things that are happening, like what's happening in Belarus on the Russian border at the moment. Zimbabwe, I comment on. I have still a lot of contacts there. But yeah, just keep generally pretty across what's happening out there.
And so how do you do it all? Like, how many cups of coffee? Do you have a workout regime?
And, you're drinking coffee now at nearly...
How many? It's at 8 o'clock in New Zealand. How many hours of sleep do you actually get? Like, I'm just really curious how you manage your life to be so high performing, really, as a world leader. What is your schedule like?
Well, ideally, you don't have to do things early in the morning, because if you're going till 2 or 3 in the morning, you don't want something that's at 6 or 7 o'clock. And sometimes, people try to kind of do a back-to-back like that, and 3 hours sleep is no fun at all. I actually like sleep. I never get enough of it, but I do like it. Yeah.
And do you have a workout regime? Do you have certain Ks you cover in walking? Or
yes, I've got the Fitbit,
You've got...
Oh, nice.
And we're supposed to do 10,000 steps a day and get up every hour and do the 250 steps. So yeah, no, I do keep fit.
That's really good.
And I'll just invite people too who are watching on Facebook Live. We have quite a few viewers on there, so feel free to comment and ask Helen or myself any questions that you want. And we'll interact with those comments as they come in.
I guess my other question for you, Helen, would be, you talked about this, really, really busy schedule and all these different issues and policies that you're still involved in. You've had such a monumental figure in. How do you select and say no to, or choose the things that you want to champion? Because obviously, I think there's a lot more things probably that you would be wanting to be involved in if you had the time. But how do you select the most important ones?
Yeah, I think I'm involved in enough things at the moment, so it becomes quite easy to say no. But there are things which don't necessarily require a lot of your time, which you can support. For example, I'm on, sometimes say, yes, I'll join an advisory committee for something or other. And it might have a call once a year when they touch base. But yeah, I've over time I've prioritized the things that I'm chair of, obviously.
Yeah.
And then with events, I look at is it something that is going to be relatively easy for me to do, because I'm sort of working on those issues at the moment. I don't have a lot of time to prepare, new things de novo. So, but sometimes I think, it would be quite important to work up a speech on that, and then that will also help with other events for a while. Particularly since COVID struck, I've been doing a tremendous amount of webinars and events for offshore organizations, universities, think tanks, etc. And I would say since late February, I've been very, very focused on COVID-19 and the issues that's raising around the world, because it's not only the health response that's the issue, it's the fact that it's responsible for the first rise in global poverty this century, a blowout in the numbers of people on the brink of starvation, the huge challenge of the out-of-school children, and there could be, up to 40 million who never get back to school at all. And for girls, that will mean forced early marriage, girls and boys, child labour. And then there's the fact that countries' GDP has plunged with lockdowns, the tax revenues down. That will affect their ability to pay for the most basic services like schooling and health, for example. So it has led to a full-blown health, economic and social crisis with peace and security overtones, because if countries descend into a downward spiral of despair, you will get a lot of civil discontent. If people are poor, jobless, hungry, they're not going to put up with it. So I've been speaking a lot about that range of issues, and also contributing to letters which I've worked on with former Prime Minister Gordon Brown about what the international community needs to do. So definitely given priority to that in the last few months. It's been a relief to have the European summer come along, because they've kind of taken a break for a while, but I know that come the beginning of September, it'll all be full force again.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned Gordon Brown before, because when we caught up a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about how I asked you about the whole process, about how you got involved in the United Nations and how you got into that role. Would you like to talk about that a little bit? I found that quite interesting, how you almost doubted yourself, or how Kiwis have this innate imposter syndrome and we think we're not good enough, or we don't put ourselves forward.
Yeah, no, we're always good enough, but you do need allies to get to top positions like that, and obviously to make a bid for being the head of UNDP, I needed to have New Zealand government support, which I had. John Key very quickly gave that support. The New Zealand government, ran a campaign around it, which was great, as they did later for the Secretary General campaign. Prime Minister Gordon Brown was very helpful. To have the UK support was important, because the UK is either the biggest or one of the very biggest donors to UNDP. So if they like a candidate, that's going to be helpful. If they don't like them, it's not going to be helpful at all. So, yeah, I mean, there's no way I could have got that job without having been New Zealand Prime Minister. In the past, the position had gone to an American up until the end of the 1990s. It had always been the American nominee, a bit like the World Food Programme is now, and UNICEF. The American government nominates the head of it. And when the government changes, when the term of the person ends, they go, because it is, President Trump has named the head of the World Food Programme and the head of UNICEF. I have to say, good people were named, right? I have an enormous amount of time, and the enormous amount of time for Henrietta Fore, who's the head of UNICEF. and is a former Republican administrator of USAID and the head of the World Food Programme, has been absolutely passionate in advocating for help for the hungry. But that's what UNDP used to be like. It was a US government nominee, either Republican or Democrat. But UNDP got a little bit run into the ground, and Kofi Annan decided that he wanted something different. And he picked a very dynamic British citizen, Mark Malloch Brown, in '99, and Mark, in about 6 years, became Kofi Annan's chief of staff, and then even deputy secretary general briefly before leaving New York. And then there was a Turkish citizen, Kemal Dervis, very well known in the US because of time at the World Bank, who held it before I did. So at least that pattern had been broken, that someone different with different skills could come and do the job.
Absolutely. And so what do you think from, being a Kiwi makes you distinctive, or, what have you found to be different yourself compared to all your other counterparts around the world? You're involved in so many different organizations around the world. Obviously, you're meeting with people and leaders, and probably, the top leaders of all these different countries. What makes you different, or what do you think, being Kiwi makes you different?
Well, for the most part, it's an advantage because New Zealand's global image is a good image, and long has been, right? We're thought of, we had a bleak spot, I think, with the Muldoon government, but, that's kind of your grandparents' era, right? Really no one remembers that anymore except people of my age. So generally, we're very well regarded. It wasn't an asset being a New Zealander when I went for the Secretary General job, because New Zealanders are known for being independent-minded, and that's not something that most of the great powers look for in a Secretary General. But in general, I think coming from New Zealand, you have experience of working in a culturally diverse society. And our world is extremely culturally and ethnically diverse. So if you bring insights and understanding of that to positions, that's extremely important. When you work in a UN organization, you work with people drawn from around the world. You have to be very sensitive to people's religions, backgrounds, experiences. If I think back to my UNDP office, my chief of staff was from Senegal, a Senegalese economist who'd been in the UN system for quite a lot of years, and with UNDP for quite a lot of years. My deputy was from Costa Rica. Her family were Jewish refugees in the 30s to Costa Rica. She became vice president of her country before coming to the UN. My personal assistant was from the Philippines. The lady who did most of my typing was from Paraguay. My deputy chief of staff was first Danish and then a British citizen. Just from all corners of the earth, people come and work, and you need to have a work culture which is very inclusive of everyone. No room for racism, stereotyping, stigma, prejudice, anything like that. And also on the rainbow issues, LGBTQI, UNDP and the UN in general had very, very good policies on inclusion, support for staff living with HIV. And as around the world, there were a lot of staff living with HIV. There are still countries with very high levels of HIV prevalence, and supporting staff to work against stigma, make sure people had their tests, their antiretrovirals, all very, very important.
We've got a question on the Facebook Live comment section from Sharon Kane. She said, aside from the COVID response and recovery, what do you consider to be the most important focuses required for Aotearoa?
Great question.
Yeah. Well, I think since March, we were thrown into crisis mode by the pandemic, as the world was. And, put all the sort of argy-bargy and the searching media queries aside, without doubt, New Zealand is seen as among the very best responders to the pandemic in the world, right? Let's be clear about that. This is not a bungled response.
Yeah.
Now, so that got us through those 7 weeks of level 4 and level 3 lockdown combined, and we came to, you know, a much more relaxed time again. But what I think's really important to communicate now, and for you as candidates, if you're asked, it is impossible to stop more cases of community transmission. Look, there's the human factor, and the best systems are not infallible. So the issue is, and this is the kind of, you know, near medium term response, that whenever it arises, you have to swarm around it and close it down. And that's what's happening at the moment. And you learn from whatever gaps there might have been in the system. And clearly the health department wasn't doing what it was supposed to. It had told the Prime Minister and government that, you know, it recommended the strategy of everyone being tested, and then they didn't test everyone. Heaven knows what was going on. But okay, you plug that. It's happening now. I think we will need to get a lot tougher on masks because that is helpful. We will need some kind of Bluetooth tracing, whether it's Sam Morgan's app or something else, because let's face it, the contact tracing at the moment is like, you know, the 19th century. You sit with the family that got tested and were positive, and you say, well, who have you seen? Look, if we all had Sam Morgan's COVID card around our necks, it would tell us who we'd been near for the last 3 weeks. And you've got the phone numbers. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
So I think, you know, this near medium term response, we need to be able to cope with it, even up our response from now. And we should learn all the time from what other countries are doing. And Taiwan's doing the sort of things I've just described. And hopefully, as we get more sophisticated with this, we can manage future outbreaks without level 3. The ideal would be to manage in a very targeted way around level 2. So, you know, poor Auckland, which is the main point of entry for people, you know, this is a quarter of our population, a huge part of our economy. And, you know, to have it, you know, with severe shutdowns is very, very difficult. So, you know, I think every country is learning, as New Zealand is, what you can do, what you can improve. So this needs to be very much on our mind, because the next message I have is this ain't going away anytime soon. You know, some people speak positively about a vaccine by the end of next year. Well, maybe, but how efficacious? Will it stop you getting it? Or will it just mitigate symptoms? If it's the latter, does it mean I won't die of it, but I might have permanent heart, liver, and kidney damage and lung damage? You know, so this is a problem to be managed around. So then, taking that longer term perspective, we then have to think, well, what about the parts of the New Zealand economy which are badly affected, like international education and tourism? Clearly, they're not going to look anything like they've looked for the foreseeable future. International tourism isn't happening at all. And, you know, I hope at some point the students can come back at least to the degree granting institutions, if not the language schools. But we need new sectors. So I think the next thing really for the government to get its teeth into post-election will be support for entrepreneurs and innovators, the ecosystem as it's called, for startup companies in what we call the weightless economy, you know, the innovation, tech, online solutions economy. We've got, you know, so many incredible Kiwis coming home with a lot of ideas and skills. And if we can create that environment in which they can set up companies, start employing people, start innovating, selling to the world online. You know, one industry I've kept an eye on for years because it was getting attention during my government when Jim Anderton was Economic Development Minister, is interactive games. You know, this can be a very, very lucrative industry for New Zealand, but the ecosystem to back it needs some support. So I'm actually quite positive that New Zealand can reshape and rebuild the economy if we take a really smart and strategic approach to it now.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think, yeah, innovation, and from I guess a young person's perspective, because we're all internet natives, it does excite us to know that New Zealand will have that opportunity to reshape this industry. Yeah, I'm so excited that you said that, and that which kind of perfectly segues into one of the questions. You're on Snapchat and Instagram, and you're always posting, and your presence is so amazing on all of the social media platforms that you are. How do you keep up to date? Because I just realized you got into Parliament before both Liam and I were even born. And that's a praise, by the way, Helen.
Can't be true. Can't be true.
and how do you keep relevant? Like, how do you stay up to date with all these trends? And I was going to test you with like a Gen Z phrase as well. How do you keep?
Speaking of which, I must take my photo.
Yeah, you're more active on social media than I am.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, we've lost her.
Just as I'll say, she's so.
The interesting question.
Just as I was praising her internet skills.
It's just we were going on about it. It finishes.
How ironic.
Look, I read all the time, right?
Yeah.
Come back, guys.
Oh, yeah,
here we go.
That's great.
So when I'm not doing events like this, or with the organisations I'm involved with, I'm reading. I read. Constantly keeping up with all that's happening in the areas that I'm active in. And
is that news sites and articles, or can you give us a few kind of resources that you read so that we can?
Well, I think a key medium for me is Twitter, because Twitter is used by news organisations, by organisations which have something to say, and so obviously I follow all the key organisations and sources and areas that I'm interested in, and that really keeps you up to date. I don't find neither Facebook nor Instagram are useful as a news source. LinkedIn is used quite a bit by people, but for me, Twitter, the news headlines, the link to the article, that's a very good way of keeping up to date. And if you're following the sources that are going to provide the information that you're looking for, you can cope pretty well.
Yeah.
Wow, there we go.
We've got a comment here as well from Christine, who says, "Thank you, Helen, for being a wonderful role model for our young candidates. A question for Liam and Naisi: can you give us an idea of what has drawn you to run for Labour, and what advice would you give to other young people? Wish you the best on both of your journeys." And Helen, you might be able to pitch in and give us some advice as well.
Let's hear you.
Do you want to go first, Naisi?
Yeah, so for me, I guess Labour was a no-brainer, I guess, because I came to New Zealand with my parents when I was 5, and that was 1999. So Helen was the only Prime Minister that I knew growing up in New Zealand. So actually today I was quite nervous about coming into this life with you, not because, because we've met each other, we've talked, throughout these couple of years now, but for me it was like, because I didn't know kind of your life before you were PM, like before 1999. Like I didn't know all the historical moments. I didn't live through that, neither did my parents. And so you were the beginning of my New Zealand history and your government and everything that you guys did. And so I proudly grew up under the Clark government. And so I knew how good it was, how good things can be. And I definitely saw that change 9 years later. And I could sense it. I think I'm a very intuitive person, so I could sense it. The interactions between people on the roads, on the streets, it was different. It was different in New Zealand. And so I desperately wanted to bring back a government that, made New Zealand back into the New Zealand I knew and I grew up with. And that was really important for me because I didn't know any better. Or I didn't know any different. It was the best. Yeah, so that's why I'm running for Labour.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of 7 children. I'm the youngest of 7 kids, and I was raised by a young mum. And so obviously that was a no-brainer that Labour were the government who was supporting us and looking out for the most vulnerable people in our communities. A lot of my family were involved in the railways and obviously in the unions there as well. But also when I got to university, that's when I truly got involved, and I got involved in Young Labour, worked on local body politics, got involved with different politicians as well. One of the really great politicians who I met along my journey was the Honourable Marion Hobbs, who was a cabinet minister for Helen, as Minister for the Environment. She was an incredible help along my journey. 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 She was an incredible help al Helen's just popped off the screen now, but I'm sure she'll join back in a second. But yeah, so she was a huge help along my journey through politics and gave me heaps of opportunities. And we got her onto the Otago Regional Council on her campaign. And then also David Clark has been a great MP for me. He's given me lots of opportunities through Southern Young Labour, and I work for him through parliamentary services. But just don't be blind to opportunity. That would be the advice that I give to young people, because, I think there actually is a lot of opportunity out there for us. A lot of the time it's a damper that we put on our own moods, that we say, oh, we're not good enough for that, or, that won't be applicable to me, or that's not
Absolutely.
I think just grab everything that comes to you, and you'll be surprised.
Exactly. And so for me, it was like how I became a candidate was because basically Raymond approached me and just said, we need a younger woman, especially to represent the Chinese community as well as the younger generation as well. And that's where I think for young people, definitely don't say no to anything, well, as much as you can. And also for actually this message will probably go to the older people, is to try and look for the second generation, try to spot those, emerging leaders, I think, and to just nourish them and to encourage them and bring them up and mentor them. It's really important, because I wouldn't have gone into where I am today without a lot of older people who believed in me and knew that I was different. I might even go against some of their wills, but I had something else to offer that was different to them, and I truly thank them.
And also it's quite inspiring, like within Young Labour, we have some incredible people all across the country and all over our branches who are campaigning and even lobbying our own party, to make sure that we're still staying relevant to young people. And we've got great work being done on conversion therapy, on trying to campaign to make 16-year-olds able to vote.
Oh, I'm so excited for that one.
But we've got some incredible people in the party who are really pushing for change. And there's a lot of opportunity for young people to come through as well. And the surprising amount of support from older people within our party is really great.
Yes, it is. Yeah, plug for Young Labour. Like it is about finding your own tribe. It's about finding a group of people that are like-minded with you, and to you, and then you're able to go a lot further when you have buddies along the way. Like Liam and I are able to, just to chat to each other and just to support each other. And I've, especially as a female candidate, I guess, which is very. Helen might have more to say in this, because I think her time would, obviously I'm a lot more fortunate than she was, I think, in terms of having a lot more wahine around me. So I have the incredible support of all the female candidates in Auckland who are just like sisters to you, and they would talk. I'm now more acquainted with childcare because of Anushi and Camilla telling me the details of how they look after their children. And but that's just the now those are the people that are running for government, for politics, and running in politics, and that's what reflects our nation. Helen, your advice to us.
Give us some inspiration.
Yeah, well, I think for young people, the attitude should be no decisions about us without us. Why wouldn't you participate? Why wouldn't you enroll and vote? There's issues that affect your future, both in the referendums and in who you want to lead the government of the country, who you want to participate in that government. So I think for me, deciding to get actively involved was a no-brainer. I went to university in 1968. The campuses were very, very political. A national government was returned for a fourth term in 1969, representing so many things that we as students were very angry about. And I wasn't able to vote actually at 19. I didn't get my first vote till 22 in 1972. But I got actively involved after the 1969 election, because I said, we can't go on like this with governments that want, rugby tours with apartheid South Africa, that governments that, keep troops in Vietnam, governments that don't say anything about nuclear testing in the Pacific. There was a whole long list of issues that as young people we felt very passionate about. And, you gravitate to the party that expresses the things that you're passionate about. And for me, that was the Labour Party. When Norman Kirk was elected in 1972, he brought the troops home from Vietnam. He stopped the apartheid rugby tour coming to New Zealand. He sent a cabinet minister up to on a protest vessel to French Polynesia against the testing. I mean, New Zealand had an independent foreign policy, and we were very proud of that as young people. It was devastating when the government fell after only 3 years, and then it was 9 years to come back from that, from 75 to 84. And I was active through that period, except for the 1 year I was overseas on a scholarship. But I when I went overseas on a scholarship for a year, I always saw myself as coming back. I wanted to make a contribution here in New Zealand. And I think particularly with COVID, perhaps a lot more young people will be thinking about their future here rather than offshore, because New York, London, they don't look so glamorous right now, do they? With COVID-stricken countries. And there is so much you can do from a New Zealand base. And I think we will see more people looking for their future to have their base here.
Absolutely. And I see a question here because she's my organizer of events in my team here in Botany. Judy said, what would be the top don't do, in your opinion, Helen, for young politicians? Politics takes a big toll on anyone's mental health. So any advice how they can cope with the pressure?
Yeah. So firstly, don't take it personally. I mean, politics leads some people to say and do extremely silly things. And that may be at a public meeting where people are abusive, which we're not going to see so much of because of the COVID pandemic. There's a lot of bullying on social media, absolutely vile and revolting stuff. And if anyone wants to get the flavor of it, if you do a Twitter search on Helen Clark or Jacinda Ardern, you just find there are some revolting people out there. But my point is, you don't have to put up with any of them. You block them, you report them, because it's not reasonable. We all, support reasonable debate and different points of view, but we don't support people, just being abused and sworn at and having outright lies told about them. So resilience, very, very important. Don't take it personally and deal to those who are bullying. I think there's other basic rules. One is honesty. You don't pretend to be something you're not. Don't say you believe something when you don't. When I was a young politician, abortion was quite a controversial issue. And in Mount Albert, there were significant Catholic communities. In Mount Albert, in Alberton Avenue, the Catholic Church and schools there, Point Chevalier, Grey Lynn. And I remember being asked at a public meeting at one of these, my opinion, and I always said, look, my opinion is that it's a woman's right to choose, and it is a conscience issue. And if it arises, that's what I'm going to be voting for. There's no point saying, oh, I sort of half think this or half think that. You have to, particularly on those sorts of issues, be very clear on where you stand. And then, people have to look at the bigger picture. If that's their single issue, well, they're not going to vote for you. But actually, for most people, it isn't. They have a range of other interests as well. So honesty, resilience, very important. And you've got to be prepared to work hard. And none of this comes easily. It is hard work. Everything's hard work, from being a candidate through to being a member of parliament to obviously to being a minister and prime minister. And you're always in the public eye, particularly the higher up the tree you go. And there'll always be someone who wants your job, and they're going to make your life misery. And the media, their function is to scrutinize. But you also have to get a sense of enjoyment from it, professional satisfaction, feel you're making a contribution. And once you don't feel those things anymore, you should leave at once and go do something else.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned that about you got to have tough skin. And I saw that, I read an article the other day from Chloe Swarbrick talking about how you've got to find a great balance between having thick enough skin to not take on that personal criticism that you always constantly get, especially running in a blue seat. It seems to be quite thick and profound on social media, but also to be warm enough that you're listening, because I've got a campaign office in Oamaru, and you have a bunch of people coming in talking about really tough issues that they're going through and personal issues as well. So it's about finding that balance, isn't it, between being warm, but also being tough against that criticism. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and politics is about people, and people often need an advocate, and that advocate should be the local member of parliament in their office. I mean, the bread and butter work for an MP's office, at least in my time, was that people would come in with their particular circumstances on pretty basic issues: their accident compensation, their benefit entitlement, something happening at the kids' school, the length of the waiting list, trying to get their partner an immigration visa, and you provide a sort of interaction, a service with government departments. And I do notice, because people still contact me asking for help, and I say, look, I'm just one person and not actively involved, but I always tell them to get in touch with their MP's office. And frankly, I haven't been impressed by some of the service. And I'll advise people to go to the office regardless of what party the MP's from, because I think the elected MP has a duty, but not everyone carries it out conscientiously.
Yeah. We've got a comment here on Facebook from Jack Manning, who's the president of the Otago University Students Association. He said, "Kia ora, Helen. For many people, lockdown brought home how prevalent technology is in our lives. Do you have any thoughts on what the flow-on effects of COVID-19 for the technology sector in New Zealand might be?"
Oh yes, I think that online solutions and ways of working. I mean, this is the way, not of the future, but the present. And I think that there's been so much improvement in say the video conferencing techniques. And Zoom, everyone's heard about now, but there's Microsoft Teams, there's WebEx, there's Kudos, another one that I've been on, and it'll actually take some persuading to get me back on a plane now, because so much can be done online, virtually. So the companies that are in this space, they're doing pretty well. And as I say, there will be a lot of Kiwis coming home with ideas for startups. A lot of them, technology, ICT, digital solutions related. And I think, that this could be very, very positive for New Zealand.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what, I guess, back to kind of a little bit more of your personal life, what is your support mechanism, I guess, like when you do face that criticism, or you do have a hard time, maybe you're dealing with some criticism or failure or whatever in your life, Helen, disappointments. What has been your go-to defense mechanism or support mechanism?
Well, I say in politics, not every day goes well, right?
That's right.
And you'll know that. But I mean, the sun comes up every morning, goes down at night. Jim Anderton, late Jim Anderton, who I worked with for probably half a century almost, used to say, a bad day in government is better than a year in opposition, right? So get it in perspective. Not everything will go well. People do let you down. You might even let yourself down. But you have to learn from that and move on fast. Because if you can't move on, and if you are always dwelling on thinking, oh, what could I have done better? Well, people often ask me, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made? And I say, I'm not going to answer that question. There's people professionally employed in the opposition and the media to go around pointing out mistakes. Why would I? I said, the point is you learn from every experience, and that will make you a successful politician.
Absolutely. Are we still looking for? We'll finish with one last question, Liam.
Yeah. So I might as well. There's a few on there, but who would be the most unlikely friendship that you made in your career in politics, Helen?
That's such a great question.
I always like asking these to politicians, and the most interesting one that I asked was to our MP in Dunedin South, Claire Curran. She said Judith Collins. They used to do bake-offs in their select committee meetings, and
Are you kidding me? Oh my God.
A small friendship there. So who's the most unlikely one for you, Helen?
Yeah, I mean, I found in politics you didn't really develop friendships with people across the aisle. The Bellamy's restaurant at Parliament, where the MPs eat, there was always a table for the Labour MPs and a table for the National MPs. and people didn't mix. And if they did sit together, people would be wondering what was going on. But actually, when you leave politics and you work more on issues as I do, you often you get to know people that you knew because they were in politics, but on the other side. But you get to know them a lot better, like Jim Bolger. I mean, I was leader of the opposition when Jim was PM. But we have an excellent relationship. I've kept a good relationship with John Key, with Jenny Shipley, and I've had really tough things that I've said about them and they've said about me in the past. But we're kind of over that. We work on things together as we need to. Don McKinnon, who was National Deputy Prime Minister, again, I've worked with on a number of issues. I have a lot of respect for Don, who of course became Secretary General of the Commonwealth for 8 years. So these things tend to happen after you leave politics rather than while you're there, in my experience.
Yeah, people do change as well. I'm privileged enough to work with Sir Don and from New Zealand China Council perspective, which he is chair of. And yeah, I think he now, if you talk to him privately, he is a different man than what he used to be, at least from the videos and all of the articles I've read about him before. So I think, yeah, leaving politics on your side of politics, Helen, or at least on your side of Parliament and being in PM, it's a different, I think it's a very, very different light.
Yeah. But it's not that people resolve from their basic beliefs, although what is very interesting to me about the American campaign now is how many Republicans are coming out from Joe Biden. This is phenomenal. Never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Colin Powell, who was very well respected as George Bush's first Secretary of State, John Negroponte, who was very, very senior, Governor Kasich of Ohio, people making these very, very senior former Republicans making statements into the Democratic Convention online. So I think that shows what happens when a party goes far too far in one direction and people are uncomfortable. And these are, centrist Republicans. They would have been at home with Nelson Rockefeller and Reagan probably, but they don't like this. And very interesting. We don't see much of that in New Zealand. We're a smaller society and we I suppose tend to stick to our tribes a bit.
No, but this is very special times that we're in, especially globally as well. So I'm not surprised, new things are happening, because I think, especially over in the States, it's extraordinary times that we get to see this happen. We are living through absolutely extraordinary times, not just in politics, but obviously COVID and everything. But having you back here, Helen, has been definitely a highlight for me, seeing you more around New Zealand and in person, and your presence and also all the way across all of the New Zealand issues as well has been an absolute inspiration for me, at least.
Well, you asked me to do a fundraiser, Maisie, but I think your fundraiser probably got cancelled, right?
It did, or postponed, so it will come back, because I'll ask you a second time.
Let me know next time.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I had a comment on there saying, loving the intergenerational political conversation. I think that's a really interesting thing about us gathering, is to share our different perspectives on different issues. So it's been a real pleasure, and I hope that the people who are watching on Facebook have learned something or found a little bit of something interesting at least. Yeah. Yep,
hope so. And all the best to both of you. And, I mean, you're starting well behind the 8 ball with, as Young Labour and tough seats, particularly Naisi. Liam, your attitude can be, you can win this.
Yeah.
You can.
There you go.
I remember years ago we had the Premier of British Columbia, New Democratic Premier, which is a sister party of the Labour Party. And Jim Anderson got him out to address our party conference in the lead up to the 84 election. And Dave Barrett took the stage and he said, look, I want to say to all you candidates out there and seats the party's told you are unwinnable, just ignore them and get out and win it.
Get down, bums up and get to work.
That's
right. Exactly. So that's our takeaway today, definitely.
That's
from
your takeaway.
Helen.
Get out and win it.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you later.
See you, and all the best.
See you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye, Helen. Bye.